Hey, welcome back, and let's continue our conversation about conditionals. If you remember, we talked about the similarities between a cooking recipe and a computer program, meaning you follow both step by step by step. So each instruction is being executed and then followed by the next instruction and by the next instruction. So you don't really mix up the things. But different than a cooking recipe in a computer program, there's actually ways to branch off to decide how to continue, with which step to continue. And this is called a conditional. And we had examples like validating user input, like our famous ATM example. If the PIN code has been entered correctly, then the next step is usually to enter the amount of money that you want to withdraw. But if the PIN code has not been entered correctly, then the next step would be to show an error message and ask the user again to enter the PIN code correctly, right? In our simplified world, at least. So that means the next step is not always the same, no matter what. Like in a cooking recipe, the next step can be determined by a certain conditional. And a conditional means we have a condition that we can evaluate. And part of that condition is a comparison. That's sort of the heart and soul of this conditional. If the ATM, in the ATM example, if the PIN code is correct, then do something. And let's talk about what kind of conditions we can define there, we can use there. And I was hinting at it already. If the ATM PIN code is correct, means if it's equal to the correct code, if the PIN numbers that have been entered is equal or are equal to the PIN numbers that make up the correct PIN, then continue and sort of spit out the money or ask for the amount to be withdrawn. Otherwise, maybe ask the user again or do something else. So the comparison there inside that condition is checking for equality between the entered value and the expected value, right? We check whether the PIN code that we entered is equal to the correct PIN code. And that, of course, means that we somehow have to know the correct PIN code, but it's coming from some bank system and it's really of no concern to us right now. The important thing is we can sort of compare the equality between these two variables. We have one variable storing the input from the user and another variable storing the correct PIN code, the actual PIN code. And then we can check in our conditional if the value in the one variable is equal to the value in the other variable, right? If the entered code is equal to the actual correct code. So one type of comparison that we can use in these conditionals is for equality. We can check whether two variables are equal. There's also other numerical comparisons like less than or bigger than. And that also could make sense in the ATM example. For example, if you think about the amount of money that you want to withdraw, what would be the condition to, be able to withdraw the money? Well, probably your current balance has to be bigger than or at least equal to the amount of money that you want to withdraw, right? So I'm entering the amount that I want to withdraw in my ATM here. And then the check is, the comparison that's being made is if the variable storing my amount that I want to withdraw is less than my variable storing my current balance, right? Or you can sort of switch it around and say if the balance is bigger or at least equal to the amount that I want to withdraw, then we can allow the withdrawal to take place, right? Then it's cool, and otherwise we will probably show some error message or whatever. Another example, you could use this less than or bigger than, are when you are entering a password, when you're registering somewhere your account and you have to supply a password, then this password has to meet certain conditions, certain criteria. And one of them is probably the length of the password. A password with maybe two numbers or two letters is probably not sufficient enough, not long enough. So the check could be of the length of your password. So you enter a couple of numbers and letters, and then the computer counts how many characters that has that entered password there, the length of your password, and checks then if the length of the stuff that you entered is at least, meaning equal to or bigger than the amount of numbers or of letters that we sort of specified as the minimum that we need, right? So length of your password equals or is bigger than the minimum that we want. Probably 8 characters or something is pretty typical. Okay, so these are conditionals, and these are the comparisons that are taking place in these conditionals. And the most important ones, and sometimes the most often used ones, is for equality, meaning you're checking the two variables and whether the values stored in these variables are equal. Or for numerical values, you can check if one of them is less than or bigger than the other. And then if that condition is true, you can do one thing in your program and continue with one step. Or if the condition is not true, it's false, and then you execute a different step, depending on, of course, what you need to accomplish there. So again, I invite you to see and recognize conditions when you're interacting with computer programs in your day-to-day life. What's the comparison taking place? What are the two values? At least, maybe there's more values involved, but maybe you can break it down into two values. What's the most basic comparison that's taking place there that you can sort of guess from the outside? Sometimes it's not that obvious, but sometimes, like in the ATM example, it can be pretty obvious because, well, it's kind of simple to understand what's going on there. At least what the check is, not of course what's taking place in the background in the computer systems in the bank there. But it's not important for us. It's important to understand the basics, and the basics are: is the PIN code equal to the correct PIN code, and is the amount that I want to withdraw less than or maybe equal at least to the current balance of your bank account. Okay, so look around, look around over your shoulder, and try to identify what's the comparisons taking place there. What's the check? What's the next step in the positive case that the condition is true, and what's the step that's taking place in the negative case that the condition is false.